You think you're smart, not loud, not arrogant, just quietly sure of yourself. You've been told it your whole life. Good grades, fast answers, teachers nodding, friends asking you for help. So you built a belief. I understand things. But let me ask you something uncomfortable. When was the last time you actually proved that? Not by passing a test, not by repeating an answer, but by explaining something so simply that anyone could understand it, because that's the real test, and almost no one passes it. You think intelligence is about knowing definitions, knowing formulas, knowing what to say when someone asks a question. But that's not intelligence, that's memory. And memory can lie to you. It gives you this smooth, confident feeling, like everything is under control, like you get it. But the moment you try to break it down, the moment you try to explain it without your usual words, everything starts slipping. Let's do it again. Pick something basic, something you know you've studied. Maybe how electricity flows, or why the sky looks blue. Now explain it, out loud. No textbook language, no memorized phrases. Just you and the idea. Simple, clear, direct. Try. Notice what just happened. Your brain didn't give you understanding. It started searching. Fragments, half-remembered sentences, loose ideas. You weren't explaining. You were trying to reconstruct something you memorized. And that hesitation, that gap, that's the truth. You don't actually understand it. You recognize it. And recognition is dangerous because it feels like understanding. You've seen the concept before. So your brain says, yeah, I know this. But knowing the shape of something isn't the same as knowing what it is. And this is where most people get trapped. They live inside this illusion, confident but shallow. Sure, but fragile, because their knowledge isn't built. It's borrowed, given by teachers, copied from books, repeated in exams, and never truly owned. School trained you for this. It rewarded speed, accuracy, correct wording, not depth, not clarity, not real thinking. So you adapted. You learned how to survive the system. Memorize, repeat, score, forget. And it worked. It worked so well, you started believing it meant something deeper, that it meant you were smart. But here's the problem. That version of smart only works inside controlled environments, inside classrooms, inside exams, where questions are predictable, where answers already exist. But outside that, in real thinking, there are no predefined answers, no multiple choice, no memorized scripts. Just you and your ability to understand. And that's where everything changes. Because now the question isn't, do you know this? It's, can you explain this from nothing? And most people can't. Not because they're incapable, but because they've never trained that skill. They've trained performance, not thinking. And the scariest part, they don't even realize it. They walk around confident, certain, unquestioning, believing they understand the world when in reality they've never tested it properly. And that illusion, it only survives until one moment, one question, one simple demand. Explain it without the words. And when that moment comes, everything you thought you knew starts to collapse. Richard Feynman didn't care if you sounded smart. That's what made him dangerous. Most people judge intelligence by appearance, confidence, vocabulary, titles. If someone speaks clearly and uses complex words, you assume they understand. Feynman didn't. He ignored all of that. He had one simple rule. If you understand something, you should be able to explain it simply. No hiding, no jargon, no performance, just clarity. And one day, he walked into a space where that rule would break everything. A room full of experts, doctors, people who had spent years studying, years memorizing, years building authority. On paper, they were the definition of intelligence, and when they spoke, it sounded impressive. Long explanations, technical language, structured answers, everything you'd expect, everything you've been trained to respect. But Feynman wasn't impressed because he wasn't listening to how they sounded. He was listening to what they actually said, and something felt wrong. Not obviously wrong, subtly wrong. Like a sentence that sounds perfect but doesn't really mean anything. You felt this before, in class, when a teacher explains something and you nod along, but deep down, nothing clicks. You assume the problem is you. I just don't get it. But Feynman didn't assume that. He asked a different question. What are they actually saying? So he listened again, carefully. And he noticed something. If you stripped away the technical words, the explanation collapsed. There was no simple idea underneath, no clear understanding, just layers of language, stacked on top of each other. And this is where most people would stay quiet, because questioning experts feels risky. You don't want to look stupid. You don't want to challenge authority, so you pretend, just like everyone else. But Feynman didn't play that game. He leaned in and asked something that sounded almost too simple. Can you explain it without using those words? That's it. No attack. No argument. Just a request. And suddenly, everything changed. The confidence disappeared. The smooth flow of explanation broke. Because now, they couldn't rely on memorized language. They had to think from scratch. And that's where the problem showed up. They couldn't. Not clearly. Not simply. Not in a way that made sense without the jargon. And in that moment, you could see the gap. The difference between knowing words and understanding ideas. Because they knew the terminology. They knew the structure. They knew how to sound right. But they didn't know how to explain it. And that's the moment everything flips. You realize something dangerous. Intelligence isn't about how complex you sound. It's about how simple you can make things. And most people, they've been trained to do the opposite, to add layers, to make things harder, to sound smarter than they actually are. Because complexity protects them. It hides the gaps. It prevents questions. It keeps the illusion alive. But one simple question destroys all of that. Explain it simply. And if they can't, then all that confidence, all those years, all that authority was built on something fragile, not understanding, but memory. And once you see that, you start looking at everyone differently. Teachers, experts, even yourself. Because now you're not asking, do they sound smart? You're asking, do they actually understand? And that question changes everything. You didn't end up like this by accident. This wasn't random. You were trained. Slowly, quietly, repeatedly. From the moment you entered school, the rules were clear. Get the right answer. That's it. Not understand it. Not question it. Not rebuild it in your own words. Just get it right. And if you did, you were rewarded. Marks, praise, approval. You're smart. But think about what actually happened. You memorized information. You repeated it under pressure. And you were judged based on accuracy, not depth, not clarity, not real understanding. So your brain adapted. It optimized for survival, not truth. You learned patterns, how questions are asked, how answers are structured, what keywords to include, what examiners want to see. And over time, you became efficient, fast, sharp, impressive. But only inside that system. Because outside of it, those skills don't translate. This is where most people feel confused. They think, I used to be smart, what happened? Nothing happened. You were never trained for real thinking. You were trained for controlled environments, where answers already exist, where problems are predictable, where thinking is limited. And this creates something dangerous. People who look intelligent, but don't actually understand things deeply. They can talk, they can write, they can pass, but they can't explain, they can't simplify, they can't rebuild ideas from scratch, because they were never asked to. And here's the worst part. The system convinces you this is normal, that this is what intelligence looks like. So when you struggle to explain something simply, you blame yourself. I'm just not good enough. But that's not true. You were never trained to do that. You were trained to memorize, and memorization creates a very specific illusion. It gives you answers without giving you understanding. So you feel confident until someone asks you to go deeper. Then everything breaks because there's nothing underneath, just layers of stored information. And this is why Feynman stood out. He refused to accept that model. He didn't care about correct answers. He cared about why they were correct. He didn't memorize explanations. He rebuilt them from the ground up, again and again, until they made sense without any external help. That's real thinking. But school doesn't teach that because it's slow, messy, hard to measure. You can't grade understanding easily, but you can grade answers. So the system chooses what's easy, not what's true, and you adapt to that. You learn to perform, to impress, to survive, but not to think. And over time, that becomes your identity. I'm smart because I get answers right. But now you're starting to see the problem. Getting answers right is not the same as understanding anything. And once you see that difference, you can't go back. Because now every explanation feels different. Every lecture, every textbook, every expert, you start asking one question. Do they actually understand this? And that question, it breaks everything you were taught. There's a simple test. So simple, most people ignore it. But it destroys fake understanding instantly. It's called this. Explain it. Like you're teaching a child. No big words. No memorized phrases. No hiding. Just pure clarity. And this is where everything changes. Because now you can't fake it. You can't rely on recognition. You can't rely on memory. You have to think from the ground up. And that's exactly what most people can't do. Let's break it down. Step 1. Pick something you think you understand. Not something new. Something familiar. Something you've studied before. Now explain it out loud. Simple words only. Like you're talking to someone who knows nothing. No shortcuts. No assumptions. And this is where the cracks appear. You start strong, confident. But then you hesitate. You repeat yourself. You get stuck. You reach for words you don't fully understand because you were never holding the idea. You were holding the explanation. And the moment that explanation disappears, so does your confidence. That's the test working. Step 2, find the gap. Where did you get stuck? What part felt unclear? That's where your understanding ends. Everything beyond that is memorized, not understood. And this is the part most people avoid because it feels uncomfortable. It exposes you. But that discomfort, that's progress. That's real learning. Step 3, go back, relearn that part. Not by memorizing again, but by breaking it down. Ask, what is this really? Why does it happen? How does it connect to something simpler? And don't move forward until you can explain it clearly, without effort, without confusion. Step 4, repeat again and again until the entire idea becomes simple, almost obvious, like something you didn't even need to memorize. Because now you actually understand it. This is the Feynman method, and it's brutal because it doesn't let you hide. It forces you to confront reality, not what you think you know, but what you can actually explain. And this is where most people fail, not because they're incapable, but because they quit at discomfort. They go back to memorizing, back to shortcuts, back to feeling smart without being clear. But if you stay with it, if you keep pushing through that confusion, something shifts. You stop chasing answers. You start building understanding. And that changes everything. Because now you're not dependent on teachers, or textbooks, or explanations. You can take any idea, break it down, rebuild it, and make it yours. That's real intelligence, not speed, not memory, not performance, clarity. And once you experience that, even once, you can't go back, because now you've seen the difference between knowing something and actually understanding it. And that difference, it separates people who look smart from people who truly are. So here's the truth. The way you were taught to be smart was never real intelligence. It was performance, a system, a script you learned to follow. Answer fast, sound confident, use the right words, and you win. But that version of smart is fragile. It only works when the rules are clear, when the questions are predictable, when the answers already exist. Take that away, and everything collapses. Because real intelligence doesn't come from answers. It comes from understanding, from being able to take something unknown, break it apart, and rebuild it in a way that makes sense, without copying, without memorizing, without relying on someone else's explanation. And that's what you were never trained to do. You were trained to follow, to repeat, to trust information without questioning it. Because questioning slows things down, and the system doesn't reward slow thinking. It rewards fast performance. But Feynman was different. He didn't care about being fast. He cared about being clear. He would sit with a problem longer than anyone else. Break it into smaller pieces. Simplify it. Again and again. Until it became obvious. Not because it was easy, but because he understood it deeply. And that's the shift. You stop trying to look smart and start trying to be clear. You stop chasing answers and start chasing understanding. You stop memorizing explanations and start rebuilding ideas from the ground up. And something changes when you do that. You become independent. You don't need someone to explain things to you. You can figure them out yourself, slowly, step by step. And that's powerful, because now you're not limited by what you've been taught. You can go beyond it. You can question it, even challenge it. And that's where real intelligence lives, not in knowing more, but in understanding better. So the next time you feel smart, pause. Ask yourself one question. Can I explain this simply? If the answer is no, then you don't understand it yet. And that's okay. Because now you know what to do. Go back, break it down, rebuild it, until it makes sense without effort, until it feels clear, until you don't need the words anymore. Because now it's yours. And this is the part no one tells you. Real intelligence feels different. It's quiet. It's simple. It doesn't try to impress. It just makes sense. And once you experience that, everything else starts to feel fake, forced, overcomplicated. You start seeing through it, through lectures, through textbooks, through people trying to sound smart. Because now you're not looking for complexity. You're looking for clarity. And that changes how you see everything, including yourself. Because at the start, you thought you were smart. Now, you're starting to realize the truth. You were never smart in the way you thought, but you can be. Not by memorizing more, not by performing better, but by understanding deeply. And once you start doing that, you won't just think differently. You'll see the world differently, and you'll never go back.